We can start. Thank you so much to everyone for coming to Ari Brostoff's book launch event. Eventually we'll do some book launch events IRL, but for now, it's really, really nice to have everyone here. This is the book, Missing Time. It's been really amazing to see people tweeting their, having received the copies in the mail. And I saw a picture of a baby holding it. Really very powerful content. Please keep doing that, everyone. You can buy this book at the moment in the N+1 online shop. A link will appear in the chat. And then soon you'll be able to buy it pretty much everywhere. And yeah, so tonight we're just going to talk about this amazing book and try to just flatter Ari a lot because they deserve it. I'll just briefly introduce everyone and then get things going. I'm Mark Krotov. I'm the co-editor and publisher of N+1 magazine. My co-editor Dayna Tortorici is here as well. The incredible novelist Alexandra Kleeman, who's the author of You Too Can Have a Body Like Mine and Intimations and Something New Under the Sun, which just came out recently, which I assume everyone in this Zoom, of course, has already read all these books, but like if for some strange reason you haven't, you have very clear marching orders. And of course, Ari Brostoff. Ari Brostoff is the culture editor at Jewish Currents. They have written for N+1. They've written for the Washington Post, for The Nation, The New Republic, for Jewish Currents, for Post 45, for so many places. And they have written this amazing book. And the last thing I'll say before we start is we should also thank the wonderful Jewish Currents for employing Ari, certainly, and for publishing many great things and putting just a lot of really kind of radical and wonderful stuff out into the world over the past few years, but also not 8 decades or something. And they also co-sponsored this event. So we're very grateful to them for that. We thought that we would sort of try to begin in a semi-organized fashion and ask Ari some questions, and then we can all kind of watch the sort of the de-evolution and the spiral into hopefully just pure vibes and conversation in real time. But so I'll start with a question, which is actually just I wrote this in a little email whenever that was earlier this week, but I don't actually know how the earlier sort of like pieces in this book took shape because we didn't really know each other and I had just started at N+1. And I wondered, not that we have to sort of adhere too much to chronology, but could you sort of tell us how the first essay in the book, the Bernie Sanders, Gloria Steinem, Wilhelm Reich, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, et cetera, essay, how did that take shape? Was it written in a fugue state? Were you, it just seems like in retrospect, reading it now and seeing it sort of open this book, it just feels like this incredible statement of intent and sort of pure act of joy and methodology. And so I wanted to know a little bit about it.
Hi, everyone. This is exciting. I'm very glad to be here. I would like to thank my lovely girlfriend, Tracy Rosenthal, who I didn't say I was going to name. I hope that they're okay with that, for setting me up in their beautiful office and making me this Bloody Mary. And also thank you so much to N+1 and to Jewish Currents for sponsoring this and hosting this and putting the book out into the world. And I'm really, really excited to have it and to see you guys or to see, some of your names pop up. Here it is again. It's really beautiful. Also, Rachel Ossip is the person who designed the cover and it's really incredible. And I guess it looks backward when I hold it up. But no, it only looks backward to me. Okay, that's how that works. Great. Okay, so in answer to your question, fugue state is basically the answer. I was like, I don't know, I think like a little bit watching the whole Bernie campaign from like a slightly jaded distance for its first few months. Like I didn't immediately jump on the bandwagon. I don't know. I was like a little bit in a period of like general hopelessness that also had to do with like being in sort of like a late grad school malaise. And then I think I was really starting to get kind of like activated by it right around the time that this very silly kind of like one-off media moment happened where Gloria Steinem was asked why girls were like young women were joining the Bernie campaign in such numbers, which I guess, I mean, it's funny because like even just a few years later, I think like nothing seems counterintuitive about that necessarily, but I think at the time that was understood as counterintuitive because it was like, well, like women should be supporting Hillary Clinton because like she's a woman. And so Steinem said like, well, like the girls want to be where the boys are. Like suggesting that they were like following, like their love interests into the campaign and, like into the left in some sense. And I thought that it was like both a really like a enraging comment and a really interesting one that like had a really I just sort of had this sense that like so much of what I was studying in grad school at the time was kind of like the backstory of that being like articulated in that way, and also that like and also felt like that backstory like was which is sort of about like the fortunes of like feminism and the new left and the backlash against feminism and the like the ways that feminist politics and the right sort of merge in certain ways in the 1980s and the story like the history of the sex wars and I don't know, I just thought all of these things that like were sort of like floating around might actually need to be like brought to bear in a more direct way to understand what was going on. And then I just wrote it like, and it was like, I don't know, I feel like it started out being like 8,000 words and then you guys cut it down to like slightly less, but it's like, it's very long. That's one thing I'll say about that essay is it's quite long. But yeah, I don't think I realized that it was like going to like appear in a magazine. Like I didn't know what was going to happen to it. I was like, I hope that like it will get published, but I like didn't really know
I want to jump in here and just say I enjoyed this whole collection so much. And when Mark originally asked me to do this, I was thrilled because I've been a fan of Ari's work for a long time. And I love the sort of paranoid take and multi-temporal collage that you sort of bring to your analysis of politics in here. But a particular thing I love reading about is suburbs and Southern Californian suburbs. So I just wanted to like, if it's all right, read a little bit of you writing about the San Fernando Valley. It's a place where I was sort of stranded for a couple weeks doing research without a car, which made the experience really potent. And I think you got it perfectly. This is from the X-Files essay. A few months later, a big tacky house that appeared to have only cracked in a few places went on sale nearby in the foothills at the far edge of the valley, and we moved in. My mom spoke glowingly about proximity to nature. Rabbits ate the lawn, and sometimes coyotes ate the rabbits. My parents hired a gardener to replace the grass with astroturf. It was the mid-1990s, but like a lot of people, we lived outside historical time. I don't think anyone has ever captured California better, maybe. This like multiplicity of historical times coexisting side by side. And I wondered how much you see this kind of analysis that you do in the book coming out of your background growing up in a place just adjacent to LA, or I guess it's LA.
Yeah, well, I should also say to everybody what I was saying to the panelists, which is Alex, I'm so glad to have you here, because I think that your work and your recent book in particular, Something New Under the Sun, is like, I really feel like it is sort of well, I guess I generally felt like there was a sensibility that you were like writing from that felt very like familiar to me as the thing that I wanted to write from, but it felt much more like fully built into a world. And then in Something New Under the Sun, I was like, oh, the world is LA. Like that's so exciting. And so yeah, I think I don't know. I guess like a thing that I would say about growing up in the Valley, and specifically in kind of like the far West Valley, like my parents live in a house that is like, it's you know, for anybody who knows the Valley, it's like if you drive down Roscoe, which runs east-west across the entire valley, like if you drive all the way to the very end and you get to like the foothills, it just stops, and then you're at my family's house. So that's where I grew up, and it's sort of like, it's kind of right on the line between kind of more like the tract home suburbs and Chatsworth, which is the more kind of like rambling, like pickup truck and gun, and also, as I mentioned in that essay, like Charles Manson kind of like part of the valley. So it's like sort of like right on that line. And I think, yeah, I mean, one thing I would say about growing up there is that like I think that I felt very much like I was growing up like in the like deep in the suburbs, like not in like the middle of things in like the way that I kind of imagined myself being, and like wanted, you know, sort of already gravitated toward as a kid, and you know, like wanted to like grow up and move into. And so I think there was like a little bit of a sense of like, you know, just like classic kind of like suburban ennui, like provinciality kind of thing. And then at the same time, like I think I had this deep-seated belief, like definitely in middle school, uh that like somehow the stuff that we were experiencing was, that if we like weren't seeing ourselves like represented in media or whatever, or we were only seeing ourselves represented in like the weirdly uncanny way that like happens when you grow up in LA, of just like everything is filmed there, but like not like, you know, but with like other kind of like foreground action happening. But I think I did feel even at that time that like whatever we were experiencing was like hadn't been represented yet, you know, like that we were a little bit in the future actually. And I think that feels very like, I don't like, there's just something about the way it's like some mix of like I don't know, like kind of the yeah, just like the sort of like famously or infamously like postmodern kind of like cityscape of LA, and like the like expectation that like things like will at some point become representable, like specifically on film. Like I just kind of remember being like, my middle school is like, you know, like the like social makeup of it, like the kind of internal politics of it, like it's like someday, like, you know, like this will be like more legible than it is now. So like that, I don't know, I feel like that weird kind of like yeah, feeling like both like very like outside uh and like ahead is like maybe something that I was trying to capture in that essay.
Absolutely. And actually, weren't we just talking about how licorice pizza
Yeah,
is shot around? So is that date today? Although weirdly transposed to the past again.
totally.
That's something for an essay.
Exactly.
Jump in. Ari, congratulations on your book. Somebody made a request that we give a little more context on the book for people who are not already familiar with it and haven't read it. I'm tempted just to read the back copy because it's so good. But give me a moment while I do that because I don't actually. You know what? All right, would you read it? Because you have the book right there. I don't have the book on.
Yeah. What am I reading? The back. What am I reading?
Back.
Reading the back. Okay. No, I can't read the back. Somebody else has to read the back.
We'll read the back. Mark,
yeah.
can you read the back?
Yeah, I'll read the back.
Okay.
Thank you.
Over the past few years in essays published in N+1 and elsewhere, Ari Brostoff has grappled with the intellectual upheavals and political contradictions that surfaced during the Trump era. After the breaking point of the 2016 election, Brostoff writes, the world came back into hideous focus, and they began to feel, for the first time, like a long-term inhabitant of the present. Missing Time collects 5 remarkable essays and a new introduction that trace the return of the 20th century's political and cultural repressed in personal and collective terms. In prose that is simultaneously sharp and soulful, mournful and ecstatic, Brostoff offers lucid considerations of the re-emergent millennial left, the enigmas of the X-Files, the complexities of Philip Roth's anti-Zionism, and many other novelties, atavisms, and atavisms newly reborn as novelties. From the communist ardor of the Bronx circa 1940 to the 90s haze of the San Fernando Valley, to a Brooklyn apartment building's tenants association in the midst of a global pandemic, Missing Time collapses past and present into a revelatory encounter with very recent history.
Great copy. Thank you for reading that, Mark. I wanted you to read that because I think it very succinctly expresses the sort of latent project that emerged over these essays, which were not conceived of toward being a book, which is this kind of lingering interest and preoccupation with the legacy of American communism, of the Jewish American diaspora, of the history of feminism, and basically the sort of return of the repressed of all of this historical baggage kind of catalyzed in the 2016 election. And reading them together, it's so fascinating how well they do fit together. And Ari, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you thought about these essays while you were writing them. Did you have a similar process for writing all of them? They all have a mix of political and personal and somewhat like philosophical or academic components, and also pop culture. Like usually you have some kind of hook or peg, not in a very newsy way, but you'll gather scraps or have something like that Steinem anecdote, for example, to go from. So can you tell us about how you write your essays and how you thought about them in relation to one another?
Yeah, I can try. So I think yeah, I mean, I was working on these while I was in grad school, and they I mean, all of them to varying degrees like were coming out of just the research that I was doing for my dissertation, and in varying ways, like some of this like became dissertation material. And I think one thing that was like happening for me in that moment was kind of realizing that my process was really different than what I understood my like the sort of ideal academic writing process as being, although I'm sure that like actually, you know, everybody's very different. But I think I know that I was having a lot of trouble in that moment kind of figuring out like what my objects were for my dissertation. Like it was like making me like really crazy for some reason to like have to do that selection process. And I think there was something that happened in writing these where like they were sort of sparked by like particular moments in the news, or like or just like little kind of like, I don't know, like scenes that I kept like working on in my head that felt like a much more organic way to like start working through the ideas that I had intended to write about in like a more straightforwardly like literary critical style. And so I think what happened is that like I kept, yeah, it was like, I think like in a way, this book is just like a document of like a fight that I was having with myself, at least like for the first few years of like putting these essays together, where I kept like, you know, I was really trying to do like a research-based writing practice. And at the same time, I mean, which I do really like doing and think I'll always do. And at the same time, like kind of finding over and over again that the object that I actually wanted to put in the center was like literally just me, which is like a terribly embarrassing thing, you know. Like I mean that it's both like an academic cliche that everybody's just writing about themselves, and also like actually doing that in an explicit way, you know, is like, I mean, it's sort of like the forbidden fruit or something that like, you know, you're like supposed to kind of refuse. And I think I kept trying to like again, like, I don't know, like negotiate that with myself by doing things like with the X-Files piece, which was the second piece in there, like the main kind of like textual materials that I was using other than the X-Files, which is like what the show is, or what the piece is largely about, is I was going through my like middle school journals and like drawing from them. And I think that that actually was like a big kind of like, I don't know, like a breakthrough or something, because I was like, oh, okay, like if this is like allowable, you know, like there was a, I think especially because I had written them so long ago, and you know, obviously like the, you know, I was not entirely the same person when I was 12 years old as when I was writing the piece. And so yeah, so I think that having that kind of distance, but also like that being the thing that sort of like validated like doing a kind of like literary critical operation like on essentially myself was extremely exciting. And then I think once I figured out that I could do that, then I mean, I don't want to say everything got easier, but it got more like knowable in advance or something.
Would you remind me what, because I know we've talked about this before, but what your area of study was and what you were originally thinking about for your dissertation before you were located?
Yeah, this is so funny because I see that my advisor Nancy Millers is in attendance, and so I feel like I'm like doing my defense again or something. But yeah, I mean, I actually was really interested in the politics of youth and aging after the 1960s student movements. And I think part of the issue that I was having is that I was in an English department, and that's not necessarily a like English department dissertation. And I mean, it's not like I'm like actually a sociologist or a historian, like I'm not, you know, whatever. But yeah, I think I was trying to figure some stuff out about like how certain ideas about the radicalism of youth and youth itself as a kind of expression of radicalism were getting shaped in that moment, and I thought had this like kind of important structuring significance on how we understood kind of the history of like the 1960s and onward. And I think that actually one thing that was happening in the period where I was writing these essays, and I kind of talk about this in the introduction in some way, is that like as you know, the sort of Trump era or whatever we're calling it now was starting, and so much that had felt so many kind of like certainties, even if they felt like they were certainties on the brink of breaking down, were like really in the process of breaking down, and like really kind of, you know, the sense of acceleration, and yeah, just like sense of whatever kind of historical break we were in the midst of. I think it felt like a lot of questions that had been more purely like I don't know, like taxonomic or schematic or something, in the way that I've been looking at them before, just suddenly became like I don't like dramaturgical. Like, sorry if that's, does that make any sense? Like, yeah, it just kind of felt like stuff that had been really like you know, in a box just kind of jumped out, and I was like, okay, well, what if I just try and kind of like write through this stuff as it's happening, drawing on the stuff that I've been researching.
I wanted to ask about the Jeffrey Epstein essay, because I feel like that's the one that maybe you and I, in a way, it's not the one we sort of like, we didn't argue over its inclusion necessarily, but I feel like we were like, well, you know, it's a shorter piece than the others. It's a kind of more, you know, it's a sort of news analysis piece. It's probably the most genre-wise, it's probably the most straightforward of the 5 pieces in the book. And but you know, I've come back to it. I'd come back to it many times even before, you know, this book was really sort of on our horizon, because I just thought it, and I should say that this is a piece that was written for Jewish Currents with co-authored with Noah Colwin, and this is a piece that basically is about, I mean, you described it sort of wonderfully in the introduction as, you know, sort of at once like a fairly straightforward piece about Jeffrey Epstein and his sort of connections with the sort of Jewish philanthropic class in America, and then this kind of like larger, very creepy project of you know, of repopulation. So it's straightforward in that sense, but then you also describe it as a piece of dystopian science fiction, and I think that, I mean, I think that's absolutely true, and I think that it's one of its kind of formal virtues is that it can be read quite straightforwardly, and then it also is full of these kind of eerie implications in a way that's actually not too dissimilar from something like the X-Files piece, which is much more straightforward in its presentation. And I was kind of wondering, you know, I don't know if this was sort of evident to you at the time. It seems like a piece that you probably wrote pretty quickly and like sort of on assignment or self-assignment, but I was wondering if like at the time that piece felt to you like you were sort of pushing your own writing in a new direction at all, and if it feels at all different in retrospect.
Yeah, I mean, so that is the piece, as you kind of alluded to, that I think was like the least obvious piece to be included in the book, and I'm actually really glad it's there, although I was like, you know, it did like take me a while, because yeah, I mean, I think the rest of these pieces were things that I worked on for a long time, that I thought about for a long time, even before I started writing them. And you know, there may be more like essayistic or something, and that piece, you know, was something that I wrote with my coworker and friend, and also you know, very briefly former roommate, Noah Colwin, who, you know, in the midst of these allegations coming out about the link between Jeffrey Epstein and Les Wexner, who's like this major Jewish philanthropist, and was kind of the person through whom Epstein was doing his own Jewish philanthropy. And you know, and part of what was coming out was like Epstein having like this dream of starting like a, I don't even know, I need to, I guess, relook at the piece, but like a kind of large scale, semi-voluntary, like birthing clinic / like eugenics factory in like the deserts of New Mexico, where like he was just gonna get a lot of women pregnant, but like, you know, in a way designed more to like reproduce his own like genetic material than in a way like than via the kinds of perversity that I think we've come to associate with Epstein. And like all of this just felt like this really insane. I mean, this is like why I think I described it in the introduction as being like a piece of Jewish dystopian science fiction. Is it felt like this kind of like really over the top satirical version of a kind of, you know, what gets called in like Jewish organizational circles, like Jewish continuity, like the idea basically that, you know, steps must be taken to promote the sort of biological furthering of the Jewish people. And to be fair, I guess it's not always biological, right? Like, but like sort of the reproduction, you know, writ large, right? Like cultural and genetic, and so yeah, it felt like there was something, you know, and Wexner himself was very involved in these like sort of like Jewish continuity efforts. And so those two things next to each other just seemed like, you know, I mean, it almost seemed like the stuff of like anti-Semitic, like cartoon or something, you know, where it was like, oh, like this is just like is not good for the Jews or for like possibly anyone. And so, you know, I think we felt like we had to, like at work, like I mean, I think this was like a piece that was really very much discussed by like all of us together that worked at Currents at the time. And, you know, we were really trying to figure out just like what to do with this kind of like excessive material. And Noah and I wound up writing that piece together. And yeah, I mean, I think that I do think it has like an interesting relationship to the other pieces, because it's definitely kind of like, I don't know, like, I guess just like in the way that, as I was saying before, like so much was just breaking down so quickly, like in those like few years in which these pieces were written. And I think like the Epstein case, you know, was like one such kind of like punctum that was just like, what the actual fuck? Like, this is just like, you know, like it's like, sorry, like it's still really crazy that happened, you know? And I think that kind of like, you know, like the like Pynchon come to life kind of like kind of aspect to it actually does feel like it weirdly like fits in with the rest of those pieces. So I think that's what it's doing there.
Okay, as someone who's no good at writing personal essays or weaving herself into her writing, I was so amazed at how well you brought together all of these different threads that were, you know, sometimes more of a literary bend, sometimes more of a personal bend, and you made the material come together in this way that just was elegant and organic. Like, I'm thinking specifically maybe right now of that moment in the Vivian Gornick essay where you're talking about your mother sort of frantically moving around from place to place, connecting people, like doing favors, sort of traversing her community. And then you talk about your own work organizing and how you've essentially become like her, like connecting, hustling. And it feels like it all just emerges very naturally and organically from the center of the essay. So if there's any struggle or flailing, like you can't see it. But that always makes me curious, like, were there things that you really wanted to work into these essays, threads you wanted to connect, things that you were sure would connect, but you couldn't quite tie in, that are sort of haunting it and hovering around the periphery for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think, well, I mean, specifically like the example that you were just giving of like, that moment or thread in that essay of like kind of like becoming my mother through other means or whatever. I think that's the kind of thing that like by the time I incorporated it into the essay, it was very much something that had become a little bit like a well-rehearsed trope or bit, like for me, like in therapy or like with my friends or whatever. And so the question in some way was like how to like get that into a form that could be like, I don't know, like both like telegraphed clearly and also like not made like terribly like embarrassing or self-aggrandizing or like hurtful or tacky or like any of the like many things that I think personal essays can often be, like just through their very form. And yeah, I mean, I do think like one thing that I think maybe happens like over the course of this book, which I think like, I mean, even though it wasn't initially being conceived as a book, like if there's like a if there's like a personal narrative that runs through it, or some kind of like formal progression or something that happens, like I think that the pieces do sort of like overall get more like comfortable in like a personal idiom over time. And I also think that by the end, like I know that I felt sort of when I finished that last piece that I was like, I think that this is like about as far as I want to go in terms of like personal revelation. And like after this, like if I want to keep doing this, like I want to write fiction. Like that was like actually like an interesting, like, because I think that I was getting so much, with like a couple of these, I would say like both with the title essay and with the Gornick essay, which I think are like the most kind of like personal ones or ones that draw most on direct like personal narrative. Like there, I had a lot of questions, and and wound up having like different kinds of conversations like with other people who are who come up in them, even though like, they're pretty like, I guess like as these things go, like you know, they're not like Romana Clef, you know what I mean? But there is still something about like representing real people in your life that is like obviously like it just like raises, I mean, like famously, like so many questions that I think can very easily become like the center of the questions you're asking yourself while you're in the middle of your writing process. And I think that ever since, my fantasy about writing fiction that I'm sure will be like dashed as soon as I actually try writing the novel that I'm like supposedly like going to be writing at some point, is that like, that making that shift will just sort of like clear some of that away through like the magic of, like what if we say that like none of this is real.
It totally, I don't want to oversell fiction. I want to read that novel, but fiction is a great place to hide if you like to hide and like peer out.
Yeah.
Favorite.
Okay, that's so great.
Favorite subject position, yeah.
I love to hear that. I'm now also remembering a conversation I had with Dayna very early in Dayna's novel writing process, where I hope I'm allowed to say this, but this was one of the most like compelling advertisements I've ever gotten for writing a novel. Do you not know what I'm going to say? I haven't like told you this like multiple times over the years. I went over to your house for dinner, and you were like pretty early in working on your book, and I was like, "How was your day?" And you said something like, "Well, like last week, my job was to try and make the real people fictional. And this week, my job is to take the new fictional people that I've made and make them feel real again." But somehow the way that you said it was like, it sounded like Gertrude Stein. And it was like, it actually like blew my mind. And I was like, that sounds like the like weirdest and most fun job I can imagine, and sounds like really hard, but also I think I would really like that. Yeah, that's we'll see. Oh, goodbye, Mark. Oh no. We're hearing that there's a child freak out crisis that will be, I'm sure, resolved pretty soon.
Ari, do you want to talk about your novel idea? There's been a request, or do you not want to?
I don't know how I started going down this like want to hear about my novel path. I don't know. I'm supposed to be writing a novel where like I'm Norman Mailer, and that's like really all I can say about it. Like that's all I know about it. I also think I
remember this one when it was still an essay. Yeah, great idea.
Yeah, exactly. Right. That was like also, that was going to be an essay for a long time, and then it was too weird.
Too weird. Audience members, if you have questions, so far the questions are like, why is Ari so hot? And can we go to the house? And Dayna's too quiet. I'm sorry if you can't hear me. Would it pain you horribly if I asked you some craft questions?
No, go for it. I love craft questions.
So how do you write? How do you write these kinds of essays that you do? Like, what is the process like?
I basically make 2 giant documents, and or a lot of little documents that ultimately become 2 giant documents. And one is like the like research document that's just like extensive quotes from like whatever sources I'm using, and like depending on what it is, like could be like interviews, could just be like background reading, and then I make another document that is just like weird thoughts that I've had, or like things that I think are funny, or like stuff that I like wrote down on my phone in the middle of the night while I was high, or whatever. And then like once I have those 2 documents, I feel a much greater sense of security that like there will be something to draw from, and that somehow like there, I don't know, like that to me is like what creates like balance or something, where like I guess this is like going back to what I was saying at the beginning of our conversation about like not feeling quite able to write academically in the way that I was trying to. I think it feels like a lot of pressure to me actually to have to only draw from one of those documents or the other. But if they're both there, then I'm like, there will be enough. And I can like, maybe I'll like be able to get more from cross-cutting them than I could just from like one or the other. And so, yeah, then I think like once I have those, I like start trying to write like little scenes, or like moments of analysis, or try to come up with like a beginning and an ending. And then there's just like a lot of very recursive kind of like putting stuff, like copy and pasting stuff onto the page of like yet another document. Sorry, this is like, does anybody actually want to hear this? And like only to delete it, because then the thing that actually will happen is like just like me writing something else on top of it. Does that make any sense?
It does to me. I wonder if it does to others, but I think with this kind of nonfiction, it can sometimes be very mysterious where the origin point is, and whether you write from the top to the tail, or if you kind of build it out from within. It sounds like it's a more kind of like inward outward spiraling accretion that kind of is a little dialectic.
What?
Dialectical, if you would.
Yes, if you will.
In between the two documents.
Totally.
Okay, I have some more serious questions. I don't know if you guys want to be credited with the questions you asked, so I'm just going to make them anon. I want to ask Ari to characterize the time we're in now. Are we back in history? Have we stalled again?
This is a trick from Ariel, our editor at Jewish Currents, who is undoubtedly trying to get me to come up with some material that could someday be in one of our editorials, where we are always trying to figure this out. Oh no, was I not supposed to give that away? I don't know. I definitely feel like I feel like we are very much in an interregnum period, where it feels as though like nothing is happening except for like the like being forced to just gaze upon like the dregs of like terrible things, without like a lot of like traction of being able to go elsewhere. And it feels both like, to me, like terribly boring and terribly sad. Like I really think I don't yeah, I'm thinking of something that Hannah Black, who I'm trying to see if she's here now that I've referenced her, but that Hannah Black tweeted a few weeks ago about the way that like the uprising of 2020 and like the like kind of political energies unleashed at the beginning of COVID more broadly kind of like seem to really produce like a spate of really good kind of like impassioned short form writing, and that it felt like that was like, you know, like the well had run dry or something by last year. And like I don't know, I mean I can say that I definitely feel like that for myself. Like I think that there was something that felt like kind of like endlessly generative, if sublimely terrible, that was like happening during the Trump years, that it was like productive, I guess is the word, right? Like, and it doesn't feel like that right now. And I think that that is actually like, this is like maybe like a weird way to answer the question of like, are we or are we not like in history? But I think it is really like a literary question, because the actual material reality is like we're always in history, right? Like the question of whether we feel like we are is kind of a question of like narrative propulsion. And I think right now it does feel like really hard to access that. and also for the same reason, like really, really important to be doing all kinds of organizing and like foundational work for the future, because we have like, you know, this kind of like break from the kind of like overwhelming, you know, just like progression of events that felt like it was happening for such a long time. And yeah, I think that all of that feels like really, I think like terribly draining, actually. Like, I don't really know how to relate to it. And I think I see that kind of exhaustion in a lot of people.
There's a couple questions in the Q&A, Ari, in open that you should look at and see if we want to answer.
Alex Colston, now known
So that's the chat. There's
as
fun stuff in the chat.
Alexa Colston. Oh, I'm sorry, that's not what I'm looking at.
Yeah, the Q&A is the further.
Oh, sorry. Yes,
No,
right.
I'm
I'm
sure
the wrong thing.
people
Look
are
in the chat too.
in the chat
You can
too.
look
Yeah.
anywhere for a question.
Alexa Colston wants to know if I mean, I guess I shouldn't be making any assumptions about anybody's names, about whether I'm running for mayor of New York. And the answer is no. We have such a great mayor already. What could I do better? Wait, I'm so sorry. Where am I supposed to be looking?
So if you look down where it says chat, share screen, record Q&A, the bottom, click Q&A.
It just pasted the question into the chat for you, so that you don't have to.
Yeah, one of my favorite things about Ari is that Ari like can't actually like use a computer.
I can use a computer. I'm a boomer. It's like the actual. That's like sort of what this book is about.
You peaked with like your first PC with the dial-up modem, and then ever since it's been you know, impossible to access.
Yeah, no, it's only around actual boomers that I ever feel like remotely capable of like using modern technology. And then I feel really great, actually. Like, then I really just feel like, you know, like my dad asked me if his version of Word had spell check on it. And I was like, it absolutely does. And like, that made me feel really good. And I really appreciate getting to feel that question. Okay, let's see. How did now one of my best friend's parents are announcing their presence. All right, I'm glad the boomer squad has turned out. Okay. Would it be a breach of Ari's personal limits to speak to how, if at all, transition played into this book? It's mentioned in the introduction, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, okay, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, so I think, oh, thank you, Andrea. So I think, yeah, one thing that is probably worth saying about this book is that the first few essays were written when I had not started transitioning yet, and like wasn't actually really thinking about it in any conscious way as a thing that could actually happen. And I think you know, one and like by the time I wrote the Gornick essay, I was like sort of deep into, you know, my like second year of transitioning or whatever. I had changed my name. And I think that was probably for like the only one of these pieces that like had my, you know, my now name on it at the time that it actually came out. And I think I think that is like a way that I hope the book gets read, is as like a kind of a secret or like unannounced transition narrative, because I think it is one. Like I mean, I think that there's like there's a kind of I don't know, like gender trouble, for lack of a better word, that kind of like runs throughout. That, you know, I mean, I think like you can imagine just like from a readerly point of view, like it could get resolved or get, you know, further contorted or whatever in like any number of ways. But what like did happen to happen is that like, you know, sometime around the period of like essay 4 going into essay 5, I like started taking testosterone and like changed my pronouns and changed my name. And like, you know, what I think that it is like maybe interesting to like read those earlier essays with that as something that's like, you know, kind of like a a looming surprise to the writer. Like I don't know, it's almost, it feels like dramatic irony or something. It's like I mean, it does kind of mean that like the reader potentially knows more about what's going to happen at the end of the book just from like the, you know, just like from my name on the cover, than like I as the writer did as I was writing them. And I don't know, that seems like kind of fun to me or something. Like I feel like that's like not something I've necessarily read in that form. And I'm like, I would be, I think I might not actually be the best person to like to like do a reading of that, but like if anybody else wants to, like I'd be like really happy, like just like free idea.
Yeah,
Okay,
maybe
wait,
maybe
yeah.
2 more questions. One question was, do you believe in God? And if not, what do you believe in? Serious question.
I don't know, I think the thing that I realized at some point in the middle of this, and I think I did, you know, write this and something I write for Jewish Currents, that's not in the book, but yeah, I think I think I do just like kind of think that God is what we call dialectics and dialectics is what we call God. Like I'm really I'm like, I'm just like a dumb valley girl, like knockoff of like the smartest things like Walter Benjamin ever said. You know, like that's like, I think that's like a little bit like my kind of like orientation is like take like that kind of um like cosmic vision of like dialectical materialism as the like the kind of like the modern name for something that like people in earlier times might have just like described as the sacred, like take like all of that and then just like make it like much stupider. And I think that that's I think that's probably like what I believe.
I'm not sure I quite buy that account, but it's persuasive. Yeah, I'm sorry, I had to close out of the Zoom for a couple of minutes because my daughter would accept no substitute, and then I had to put her to sleep quickly. But before she went to sleep, she said, "I'd love to hear if Ari could talk a little more about their novel that they're thinking about. But if Ari's too shy," and this is all a direct quote, she's almost 4. If Ari is too shy or to talk about their novel, perhaps they could, and then it's amazing that, you know, she quoted what was in the chat here. that they would love that my daughter would love to hear what Ari's working on, and if there's anything new that they're working on and that they'd be comfortable sharing. So, really, it's incredible. I'm so glad that I went to help someone go to sleep because I got this great question out of them.
Wow, Daria is so smart. I'm always saying this. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I really have much to say about the novel. I mean, I have, it's really I think it felt a little more live, like actually like a year or two ago when it was sort of first presented to me that this like weird spiraling like meta essay thing that I kept saying I was going to write like actually could be a novel. I mean, it's like, yeah, it's like transmasculine Norman Mailer, like it is maybe based on Mailer's book Armies of the Night, which is about the March on Washington in 1967 against the Vietnam War, where the Yippies famously tried to levitate the Pentagon with their psychic energy. I think that like Mailer is a they them, and for some reason that's like extremely funny to me. I don't know. It's like, I mean, Mark, like I feel like the only way that I like can retort here is by saying that like this has come up when like we've been talking also about your novel that probably exists more than mine does. But I think that we've like shared that we both maybe tend to write down what we think are like novel ideas in the form of just jokes. And I do think that is like the way that this often like manifests, is just like, yeah, it kind of feels more like it's like a very like long running inside joke with myself that I think I don't quite know what like form to give it, and so it seems like a novel would be like a funny one. But yeah, I think that's like basically all I've got.
Yeah, we'll keep writing down the jokes. I think that's a good strategy. And yeah, there's a very good joke in the chat here too from Andrea.
Yeah.
I don't know if the attendees can see the chat. The chat was, as in the sentence, Norman Mailer stabbed their wife, which was fun.
Exactly.
I think we should maybe wrap up soon, but
well, I think we could do. We said 8:30, but we can. Let's do like one or two more. There's a nice question here from Anna Wiener in the chat.
That was what I was gonna read.
Cool. Read it.
A simple question from a simple mind. Too modest. Wrong. Speaking of generative context, which you were doing several questions ago. Sorry. Does spending time in LA affect your writing? And if it offers a perspective shift, how? Great question.
Great question. Thank you, Anna. This is actually like the one thing that I really do feel like I have a lot of thoughts about right now. And now I'll try to rein them in. But yeah, I mean, I've been in LA for the past few weeks, and it's it's the most time that I've spent here in a very long time. I mean, I was also here for a couple of weeks last summer, which was itself the longest I'd been here in a very long time. And I think that sort of I don't know, like rediscovering a relationship to the city, which I actually love very much and feel like I don't know very well as an adult, is like that's sort of like the main thing that I think is actually like going on for me right now. And it feels I think I can't exactly say how it like affects my writing in general, because I think it still feels like too new. But I do think that there's a kind of how do I put this? There's a way that when I am here, I think I more easily feel myself to be like the sort of like the speaker in the essays in this book, for example, or like the maybe it's just as simple as like you know, the child that I was before I like left LA, you know, like when I was like in my late teens to go to college and then moved to New York right after that. And I think that sense of being like very kind of like directly like shaped by my environment is like, and I mean this in like an extremely literal way of like I have like way worse allergies here, or like I seem to have like unusual responses to like I don't know, just like the literal atmosphere or something, or like or maybe those things would also be happening in New York where I live now, but like they would get subsumed into some kind of like, I don't know, like they would be coded as like neurosis as opposed to being coded as just like environmental sensitivity or something. But there's like a kind of like there's like a woo-woo like mode that I think actually like comes directly out of just like feeling oneself to be extremely shaped by like the weather or something that like just like feels very kind of like one-to-one when I'm here. It as a thing to drink. You know what I mean? Like, so I think that there's just like, so I think that basically like being in LA just makes me feel like a little bit insane actually, and also very calm in like the way that I guess it is supposed to do. And so, yeah, I don't know yet, I think, what it means to like write from that place. As opposed to just like inhabiting it as like something that will then like be written through later. But I am like excited to find out.
I wanted to jump in because I don't know when I'll get to talk to you again, but this was on my mind. I know like when I'm going to read an essay on the X-Files, it's going to be a nostalgic experience for me. But what I didn't realize was I was so nostalgic for the kind of conspiracy thinking that you're doing in that essay as a teenager or preteen, and that I was also doing at the exact same time in my own vocation. It was like, I don't know, a way of putting yourself in the story, not at the center, but trying to get to the center, and also just an exercise in textual analysis and interpretation that was sort of fun and gave you a tingly feeling. And then it kind of contrasts with like you have Alex Jones as a figure, sort of not yet what he is now. And then you have the Jeffrey Epstein sort of stuff later, like a genuine full-blown reproductive icky system. And I'm wondering like if you feel that there's any future for conspiracy thinking that's not totally disjointed from reality, and like can it be a refuge? Can we reclaim it? Is there a future to the conspiracy that's not so dark?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess it feels to me a little bit like it's inevitable, and that conspiracy thinking will continue to be a mode that like the world that we live in just kind of invites, and that like we have to figure out what to do with that politically. And I mean, that is like a really strange thing about this time. It's like I think that in the moment that, I guess, like in the kind of periodization I'm trying to do in the X-Files essay, like that the X-Files might be kind of like the tail end of, but a moment that maybe starts like kind of in the 1960s or 70s, and is like really kind of exemplified in like kind of like like the high postmodern novel, where like like what the literary critic Frederick Jameson calls like cognitive mapping, right? Like where he's talking about conspiracy theory as like a mode that that kind of gets exercised if like instead of like if you open the newspaper, instead of reading down from the top of the article, if you just read the headlines, right? Like if you read horizontally across, and you kind of like try to imagine like what the connections between them are, and I think that kind of thinking, which is like, it's like so imaginative, right? But also can go in like very disturbing directions that like often can just kind of reproduce like bad ideas that are already out there, is like it's obviously taken on like a new life since the birth of like Reddit forums and the kind of internet culture that we have now. And I think like that is, I don't know, it just seems to me like that's just like a constant, like it's just like gonna be there. Like I don't know why people would like stop conspiracy theorizing in a, like, given the way in which the world appears to be like run by massive conspiracies. And like I think that we should try and do as much like like Marxist political education as we can to like try and like direct those energies in a way where people are like like it's the capitalists as opposed to like it's the Jews or like whatever the like bad version is. But I think that is like like that is that sort of like the invitation like presented by a very overwhelming and unjust world.
Thank you. This has been so great. It's been really nice to celebrate you, Ari, and hope we can do it a lot more in the coming months. Outdoors, indoors, on the screen, not on a screen. Before we go, I just wanted to urge everyone again to buy Missing Time. This really, really wonderful book that I think also like it was clearly a good idea. We'd been talking about it for a long time, but it wasn't until I got to hold it and reread it that I was like, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. And oh, great hashtag proud boomer parents right in the chat, very powerful. This is the kind of content we love to see on the Zoom. Please, if you can, support M+1. We publish this magazine that has been lucky enough to have Ari in its pages. We also publish books, we host events, we do other things. You can subscribe right there in the chat. Thank you so much to Jewish Currents for co-hosting and for being great. Thank you to Lisa Borst, who organized this event and ran the Zoom and told us what to do. And I hope we did it. And thank you so much to my colleague Dayna, to Alex Kleeman, and yeah, above all, Ari Brostoff. Thank you. You're the greatest.
Thank you guys so much. This is really, really fun. And yeah, thank you all for coming.
Bye. Good evening.